the Russians do seem to be taking a lot of casualties from Ukrainian artillery. We saw that from the I don't know if you covered the story, the Russian general that was sacked during this week for complaining about the huge losses that his men were taking exactly from this warfare. Well, the incredible thing about Bakhmut is that it's already had this incredibly long and grinding battle for it, as the Russians took such a long time to take this. It's a relatively insignificant town in the east of Ukraine. They first started attacking the environs of Bakhmut in April of last year, and then really ramped it up after they took over another nearby city, Northern Donetsk, in July. And, they finally managed to get the Ukrainian forces out of the town in April, May this year. And instead of, the battle stopping, it's, the Ukrainians are now on the offensive again, trying to recapture it. So it's still going on. And the Ukrainians have advanced in the hills and woods to the north and south of the town with a view to encircling it is one way of looking at it, but the main thing is to just get firepower over the town, which is now obviously completely abandoned of civilians. It only has the Russian army there, and it's half pulverized. And they're just their aim is just to use artillery to smash the Russians there until they withdraw. It's an incredibly brutal but quite effective form of war that's going on there.
Yeah, Kyiv claiming its forces were able to seize strategic heights over the city. You've been speaking to a commander in Ukraine's 5th Brigade. Tell us what they've had to say.
So the commanders all along this front, they kind of they're very much stressing the sort of the technical nature of this war, of this particular battle, I should say. The Ukrainians are trying to avoid what the Russians did, which is just send men in these full frontal assaults. So what you have is a very it's a battleground which I don't think we've seen anything quite like this. This intense coverage of small drones by the Ukrainians. They've got all these, what you would think of as photographer's drones. They're sort of small, $200-300 jobs that you can get off Amazon, and they've blanketed the battlefields with these. So they're watching the Russians very closely, and they've got this very high-grade artillery which they're using to target the Russian trenches. So the Russians do seem to be taking a lot of casualties from Ukrainian artillery. We saw that from the I don't know if you covered the story, the Russian general that was sacked during this week for complaining about the huge losses that his men were taking exactly from this warfare. And then it's an advancement on what happened in the First World War, really, this sort of blanketing of artillery, but it's even more marked with this use of drones to be so specific and accurate with the artillery targeting, and then the artillery going afterwards, and they are taking heavy casualties. Though whether it's just boosterism or not, the commanders were saying they're not taking as many deaths as they expected. They're not losing so many men as they expected. They are taking heavy casualties.
Because it's a strange one, really. Why Zelensky has been so stubborn in trying to sort of claim back Bakhmut when there's not much there in the first place. Is this a hill to kind of die on situation? He's been advised, hasn't he, to just sort of leave it alone, but that's not something he's prepared to do.
Well, that's right. The Western military advisors who his defense ministry talked to, the people supplying him his weapons, after all, the NATO states, were saying, look, you're going to lose huge numbers of men in Bakhmut, and to go on about the geography, Bakhmut is a sort of gateway to the rest of Donetsk province, oblast, where I am now, and that's what Bakhmut's significance is. But outside Bakhmut, to the west, there's a big hill. So the advisor said, why don't you just dig in on the hill and then get the Russians as they come up? But he seems to have said, no, we're going to make a defense of Bakhmut our central role. And who is to say he's not right? I mean, this is the whether by accident or genius, by turning Bakhmut into such a big symbol of this war, and seeing so many Russians die there, he does seem to have, triggered all the extraordinary events we've seen in Moscow and Russia in the last month.
Yeah.
These Wagner mercenaries and this extraordinary character of Yevgeny Prigozhin, where they were given Bakhmut to take, and the number of losses Wagner took there that Prigozhin went and saw for himself. Unlike Putin, Prigozhin went to the front lines and saw the men, and he was standing in literally piles of Russian bodies, and that seems to have somehow, flipped his lid, and that seems to be the trigger for what's been, these extraordinary divisions in Moscow. So it may well have been a slightly genius move by Zelensky at the political level.
Yeah, interesting. So there's no Wagner mercenaries there at all now?
It's kind of hard to know exactly what's going on with Wagner because, Wagner has at a legal level been disbanded. Its legality actually under Russian law was somewhat dubious anyway. Russian law was supposed to ban mercenary companies, but obviously it was there. Now we don't know where Prigozhin is. We don't know exactly what Prigozhin's relation with Putin is. So they've met since the mutiny and discussed the future of Wagner. Wagner is not fighting. Whether Wagner fighters are now fighting with the Russian army, some have signed contracts with the Russian army, but as a fighting force, it is no longer the defending force in Bakhmut. That's the Russian 72nd Division, if you're interested in these things.
Yeah, state media in Belarus broadcasting yesterday footage that showed Wagner instructors beginning to arrive in Belarus. Although I thought that had happened already, but that is what was being shown. Really interesting stuff. As ever, it's always great to speak to you. Times correspondent Richard Spencer. Thank you, Richard.